Hey guys, welcome to Screenwriting in Paradise. I'm Jim. I'm a screenwriter, longtime teacher of the craft, but mainly I'm a storyteller just like you. And that's why we're here. Today I'm going to do this podcast on No Country for Old Men, a classic film from about 18 years ago, I guess now, I can't believe it, by the Coen brothers, a wonderful writer-director team that brought us a few other great films like Fargo, if you ever got to see that, for example, or The Big Lebowski. But today I'm just going to look at the storytelling in the introduction to this classic film, which clearly has some controversy or controversial issues, I think, with the ending of the film, but that does by no means mean you shouldn't watch the film. It's an excellent film. I mean, cripes, it won the Oscar for Best Picture and for, I think, Best Director for the Coen brothers. Probably even Best Adapted Screenplay, and definitely Best Actor for Javier Bardem, I think his name is, the antagonist, the bad guy in this film, which is an eternal antagonist. I mean, the ultimate antagonist, or one of them. I'm a big fan of Nurse Ratched, if you saw my little thing on One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. She is my favorite antagonist of all time. But Javier in this film is phenomenal at best. A different kind of bad guy or gal or person, but extremely unique. In fact, just so I can sidetrack for a moment so I don't have to forget it or not bring it back later, but or not bring it up later. I was just reading a little bit about it, and there was a really interesting trivia note, is that a group of psychologists, or psychiatrists rather, in like 2018 watched like 400 films where there was, psychopaths in the films, and they studied them. So, I think there's 136, entries they realized were pretty good psychopaths out of those 400 films. But by far the most realistic one, that felt the most real, was this one. Javier's depiction of Anton Chigurh, I believe is how you pronounce his character, but it was so realistic, such a realistic depiction of what a psychopath is actually like in real life. A psychopath, doesn't just mean they have to be, a wanton murderer. It means they could like take your lone family photo album and just burn it and throw it out the window. They don't care, throw your dog out the window as well. They literally have no emotion or no emotional attachment to anybody else. Anyway, that's my understanding. That's, when I think of psychopaths, I think that they don't care. It's a weird breed, and he is the weirdest or the strongest of these breeds ever depicted on film, according to these psychiatrists. So for that reason alone, it's worth watching it. And obviously in most films that are iconic, that people remember, there's usually one or two scenes or a character that they always remember from those films. And this dude, the Anton Chigurh character, is the one people certainly remember from No Country for Old Men. So basically what I'll do is, again, I like to just go into the beginnings of films. That's it, the introduction, how the filmmakers create some efficient, effective storytelling, if there's anything unusual or unique about it, why it works, or sometimes why it doesn't. So it's not a movie review, it's more just an introduction to the storytelling in a particular, hopefully good film that might make you want to watch the entire film, or at least think about it. So you're not just wasting your time when you watch a movie, you actually get something out of it, And often in great films, there's a little more to it than just brain candy, so to speak, right? So, you look at my location. It's a little windy today by the beach, so I came down into the bayou, because it's No Country for Old Men, right? The beginning of the film, I'm sorry, if it's the podcast, you can't see. I'm sitting literally on a folding wooden chair next to sort of a little pond with swamp vegetation behind me. So it definitely has a little bit of that Louisiana bayou. Like if I wasn't in Denmark, I'd say there'd be an alligator in there, for example. But you can't see it, so I have to visualize it for you. And I apologize. Sometimes I forget that I'm just talking to a non-visual audience, right? But that's the purpose of this podcast, is to actually create the visuals for you guys. So, the visual storytelling, rather. So in the beginning of No Country for Old Men, it begins with this wonderful landscape, a bunch of different landscape shots of, I believe it's Texas. It is Texas. It actually might be New Mexico where they actually shot it, but it's supposed to be Texas, I believe. And it's just sort of like arid, mountainous, desert country, and various shots of that. Maybe there's a windmill out there or something. No houses really, and there's a kind of haunting voiceover. It's Tommy Lee Jones, if you've ever seen him in like The Fugitive or something like that. He has this kind of, I would guess, a Texan drawl. He has a drawl the way he talks. It's very kind of croaky and deep and memorable. Let's just say he's a great actor and has a great voice, and he is the character. He's the sheriff in the movie. But so we don't see him. We're just hearing a voiceover where he's actually talking about that he's been a sheriff in that county since he was 25 years old, and his grandfather was a sheriff and his dad was a sheriff, and the old timers, a lot of them didn't even carry guns, if you can believe it. But he's basically setting up, or the voiceover, which again is a tool I usually try to avoid my own work if I'm writing. But if you need it or if it works, it works. And in this particular film, I think it works pretty well with an introductory voiceover, basically again stating what the story is really about, which is again this sheriff talking about sheriffs of the past and how they didn't used to have to always wear guns, and how times basically have changed. So he tells this little story, again, voiceover, while we see all these visuals of the arid Texan countryside, that he, how his dad, his father, and certainly his grandfather wouldn't have really understood crime these days. And he tells the story of a boy, he calls it, a boy who killed his 14-year-old girlfriend. So probably was a 16 or 18-year-old boy, I guess, because he ends up he sent him to the electric chair. So I think to go to the electric chair, even in Texas, where they're pretty ruthless, you probably got to be 18. So he talks about this boy who killed his girlfriend, and he was the witness, and not only the arresting officer, I guess, but the main witness for the prosecution. And the newspapers, he says, called it a crime of passion. Which is somehow excusing the murder, or not condoning, but that was the motivation, a crime of passion. Whereas in reality, he said, that's not what the kid told me. He said he'd been planning on killing someone his entire life, and he would do it again. It was just kind of random. He killed this girl, and he just had always wanted to kill somebody, and he couldn't understand it, nor could we, nor could any rational person understand that kind of thinking. But that's the setup for this film, because that's how crime has changed. It's become this kind of, nomadic, wanton, people killing each other for no reason. Maybe when times were simpler, it was more over food or money or things. At least you had a motivation, not just a flippant, like, I felt like killing somebody. And that's what he's getting at, is the madness of murder and the inexplicable behavior, or the inexplicable motivation for it, because there is no motivation for a senseless random murder like that. And he then continues to talk as into the frame, because we haven't seen any human beings, we've just been seeing nature, right? The Texan nature. Suddenly we're like on the side of the road, and it's like a highway, or it's a paved road out in the middle of the desert, and there's a squad car, like a 1980s police car, a little square-looking police car, and a deputy or a sheriff walks past the camera towards the car with a perp, I guess you call it, someone he's arrested, and all you see is the guy from the rear, and he has this classic haircut, like the Beatles had when they started out. It's what's called a bowl haircut, I believe. So it's very thick, dark brown hair behind him, which we will see a lot of in the rest of the movie. but we don't see his face. But he takes the guy, and he's arrested him for whatever reason. So he's handcuffed, and he puts his hand on top of his head, and he escorts him up to the he escorts him up to the rear of the car, opens the door, and puts his hand on top of his head and like forces him down into the back seat, and then goes and gets in the front and starts to drive and calls it in, that he's coming into the station or something like that. So the deputy, after putting this guy in the back of the car, grabs this weird looking, it's like a scuba tank, a oxygen tank, or maybe it's CO2, and it's connected to this weird kind of cable with a metal handle thing on the end, or rod on the end, and you can't quite figure out what it is. It looks like an oxygen machine. In fact, that's what he thinks it is. When he gets back to the station afterward, he puts it in the seat next to him in the car, drives off, and then they get back to the station, and it cuts to him on the phone, and he's talking about that he arrested this guy, and he had this weird, looked like an oxygen machine with him, with this cable thing, coming down his arm with a handle and this weird, rod on the end. And while he's talking to, headquarters or wherever he's talking to, because he's clearly alone in the office, behind him is the perpetrator, this guy with the bowl haircut, who we now see. And, the actor's Javier Bardem, but he's this, kind of solemn, creepy looking dude with a bowl haircut, but he is handcuffed and he's sitting on a bench behind this deputy while he's talking on the phone. So we see what the deputy doesn't, which is that he's able to, squat down on the floor and basically pull his arms, his legs up and pull his arms over his legs. So now his handcuffs are in front of him instead of behind his back. And then he's able to stand up, of course, because he's not handcuffed to the table, or his feet aren't handcuffed or anything like that, or shackled. So he gets up and he walks up to the police officer who's still talking on the phone, and the police officer literally hangs up, says, "Yeah, I'll take care of this. I got it." And he hangs up, and as he hangs up, the guy with the bowl haircut puts his arms around him with the handcuffs and chokes him to death. And it's a really brutal scene. It's not just like he chokes him, it's like they go down to the floor together, and Javier, which is actually, the character's name is Anton. Anton's lying on the floor with the deputy on top of him, struggling, flopping around like a fish. How people in their death throes are. They're squirming all over the place, trying to, escape and breathe at the same time while he's choking him. But the look that, again, the directors, the Coen brothers especially, get on this guy's face is priceless in a crazy, insane way. He's, it's really hard to describe, but his eyes are wide open and he's looking up at the ceiling as he strangles this guy to death. And he's it's not smiling, it's kind of a smile snarl or something. It's this bizarre look, but it's really unnerving. It's obviously a fantastic acting job, but it's unusual, let's just say. It's a really unique and scary death sequence that this guy performs on this guy. And slowly, of course, the police officer dies. And then I think he goes in the bathroom and takes off his handcuffs and washes his bloody hands. And then when he comes back, you actually don't see him. You see his hand pick up that weird CO2 or oxygen tank with the rod attached to it, and leave. And on the floor, you just see both his boots leaving and then the feet of the police officer. And the floor, which is like a tile floor, is all scratched up, like just in the area where they've been struggling, because they both have like cowboy boots on, probably with metal in the heels. So it's like tons of scratches. So it just shows the magnitude of the struggle, because it was like, a 2-minute death sequence. So so it's not blood, it's just creepy because you see all these scratches. And then it cuts from those scratches and his feet leaving with this oxygen tank to a 1977 totally nondescript Ford, like a white Ford, traveling also down a remote Texan highway, I guess. So we hear the siren go on. And then the car pulls over, and then we see it from the driver of the car's point of view, which is a pensionist, a retiree or something, some guy in his probably late 60s, who pulls over in his old Ford on the side of the road and looks in his rear view, and there's a police car. And that's what we see. But the guy who gets out of the police car is the same guy from the police station. He's not in a uniform. He's got his bowl haircut. He's kind of got this smirk on his face, this insane smirk, and he's ominous. It's Anton. So Anton, and he's carrying his tank with this metal rod attached. And he walks up to the car, and the guy puts his window down and looks at him. And again, he's not in uniform, but the guy still says, "So what did I do wrong, sir?" Like he is a police officer or something. And Anton just kind of smirks at him and says, "Get out of the car, sir, please." Or, "Can you get out of the car, sir, please?" And he gets out of the car and stands up, and he looks at him and he goes, "Can you hold still for a second, sir?" And the man says, "Well, what's that?" He points at the tank and the metal rod, which Anton puts up to his head and then just blasts him, because what it is, it's a cow stun gun, one of those things. I never actually witnessed one, except I guess in this movie. But so how they kill cows, they put a little metal rod with, I guess, an oxygen, I assume it's oxygen or CO2, but I'm not a techie, but basically he puts it up to his head, and a rod literally is inserted about probably a couple inches into the cow's forehead, and in this case, this man's forehead, so it kills him instantly, and he falls down. So obviously, not only is this a creepy psychopath, Anton Chigurh, he has his methods, and his mode of murder is to use this cow stun gun, which is pretty unique, pretty unusual, and probably pretty untraceable. Guns are always traceable, but not this thing, as long as he hangs on to it. But so he takes him out, and it's creepy. And we leave from there to a guy out in the desert again, like a cowboy. Dude, it's actually Josh Brolin, the actor, who's playing a character named Llewellyn. And he's looking through the scope of a long-range rifle at a bunch of deers in the distance. And he takes a shot and thinks he might have hit one, gets up and walks down there, and the deers are long gone, but there is a little trail of blood, and he looks to his left, and it's actually not a deer running off. Something's limping, an animal is limping off, 100 yards or so in the distance to his left through the brush and the tumbleweeds, but it's a dog, like a big dog, kind of like a big pit bull or something. And it kind of is limping along, and it looks back at him in the distance and just keeps limping along. And so he looks the other way, like the direction the dog is coming from, and walks that way. And it's basically a hillside, again, with like tumbleweeds and brush. So he comes to the edge of the hillside where the dog came from, and he looks down into like a ravine, kind of like a valley. And there's a bunch of cars down there, like 5 or 6, like pickup trucks mainly, and scattered in like a circle, almost like the Wild West was called when the wagon train gets in a circle, like 6 of them in a circle there. And he takes out his binoculars because it's kind of far away, and he looks through his binoculars, and he can see there's a bunch of bodies lying, like dead bodies basically, lying near all these vehicles. So he goes down there, and sure enough, there's been some sort of gang warfare in the middle of the desert has gone on, because the cars are all shot up, the windshields are shot, there's bullet holes in the hoods and the doors of the cars, and there's dead people by each car, right? It's completely, probably 6 or 7 dead people at 6 or 7 cars. So he opens one car door, for example, and there's a victim lying on the bench seat, in the front seat of that pickup truck. Most of them are outside on the ground. And the last truck that he goes to, he opens the door, and there's a guy alive. So there's one guy alive, and he's clearly Spanish. He speaks Spanish or Mexican, and he says agua, the Spanish word for water. He wants agua. And Llewellyn just says, "Sorry, don't have agua," and he looks down in the seat, and there's like a machine gun, kind of like a badass little Tommy gun thing. He picks it up, and then and the guy says, "Agua," and he says, "Nope, don't have any agua." And he looks at the guy's pocket, and he has an extra magazine for that machine gun, and he's disabled because he's been shot, so he's barely able to even say agua. So he's not a threat at all to Llewellyn. And Llewellyn just looks at him and then leans over and pulls out that magazine out of his pocket, takes that too. And as the guy continues to say agua, he just walks away from him and says, "No agua." And then looks in the back of the truck, the back of the pickup, which is a big tarp over it, and he peels it back, and underneath is a bunch of drugs. Clearly it's a bunch of plastic, cellophane packages, clearly full of cocaine probably, and a lot of it. And so then he goes back to the front of the car, or into the cab, and to the dying, probably drug dealer, and says, "So who's the last man standing? Or do you speak English?" And the guy's like, "Agua," or "Lobo," or something, and he says something in Spanish. And the guy's like, "There's always there's always a last man standing." And he says the translation in Spanish, because he speaks Spanish apparently. And the guy doesn't say anything. And Llewellyn just kind of stops, looks both ways, out into the desert, and says, "Well, if I was the last man, I would probably find some shade." So he starts walking away from all this turmoil, this death and destruction, out through the tumbleweeds, in the direction of like a couple of lone trees in the distance. So it's really important that there is one guy alive. And why is that? Because basically it's really difficult in storytelling, and certainly in visual storytelling, like in a film, if you have one character and they can't talk. Because if they can't talk, you can't get inside their head. So if you put one guy alive, at least this character, in this case it's Llewellyn, can actually talk to the guy, even if he's dying, even if it's for a moment. But he can say, like, who was the last man standing? Which way did he go? Because if he doesn't get to ask that question of this dying guy, then his motivation for heading off that way into the desert to look for the money would be harder to understand, basically. So it's a simple, setup and payoff, cause and effect sort of thing. But it's actually important. Sometimes you actually need those characters there just for someone to talk to. And sure enough, you can see under one of the trees is a person sitting there, and he looks through his binoculars, and he just decides to sit down and watch for a while. I think he probably cut to, an hour later maybe, we don't know. And he's still there just watching this guy, and then he decides to go up, and actually the guy's dead. So he goes all the way up to this tree, and sure enough, the guy's in the shade under this tree, but he's got a bullet hole in his shoulder, and he's leaning against this tree, dead, or sitting against a tree, dead. But next to him is a suitcase, and a big square suitcase, like a big double-sized briefcase, rather. And Llewellyn opens it up, and it's full of cash, like wads and wads of perfectly stacked $100 bills, basically a couple $1,000,000. And he's like, And he's not like jumping for joy or screaming or anything. He's just like, okay, yeah. So he closes the suitcase up, and gets up, looks at the guy, and walks off. And then I think we see him back at his trailer park in like Sanderson, Texas, or wherever it is. So he's not a wealthy man. He lives in a trailer park with his girlfriend or his wife. And he returns with this briefcase, and she's like, "What's in the briefcase?" He's like, "Money." And she's like, "Yeah, right, I wish." And they're watching TV, and then they go to bed, and it cuts to like the middle of the night, and he wakes up, and he's like, "Ah, man." And I guess he's feeling a little guilty. He says he's got to go do something. His girlfriend's like, "Where are you going?" "I got to go do something." And he goes over to the sink, and he gets a plastic jug and fills it with water. And so clearly he's going to go back and help this guy. He actually has a conscience, unlike his counterparts in the film. He has a little bit of a conscience. He's got a little bit of humanity, so he's going to take a jug of water out to this guy. Granted, it might be a little late. It's been a long time since he left, but he decides to go out there in the middle of the night and bring the guy some water. And when he gets way out there in the desert where he, found this massacre happen. He finds all the cars, and it's nighttime now, of course. He goes down there with his flashlight, and the guy is dead. But not only is he dead, he's been shot since Llewellyn was there in the daytime earlier. And exactly at that moment, he looks up on the hillside where he parked his pickup truck before he walked down there to give the guy the water. And there's a truck up there. It's really eerie. Like, you see the light from their headlights, and that's it. And so he ducks, behind the victim, or one of the dead victim's pickups. But it's too late. These guys have spotted him, and they start shooting at him, even though it's dark out, from way up on the hillside. And then they jump up into their pickup, which is a big, not only headlights, but like a spotlight on the top too, and starts charging down the hill at Llewellyn. So he starts running in the other direction as fast as he can while they're shooting at him. And there's literally a guy in the back of the pickup truck standing there with a high-powered rifle in the dark, shooting at him as he's running. And, so it's a wonderful visual. It's creepy as hell, but it's a really great visual where he's running as fast as he can in his cowboy hat and getting chased by a pickup truck with some guy in the back shooting at him. But he manages to make it to the edge of a hillside where there's a river below. And just as he gets to the hillside, the guy in the back of the pickup truck shoots at him and hits him in the shoulder, just grazes him in the shoulder, which forces him to roll down the hillside out of control to the edge of the water. And he's okay, I guess. He's okay enough to get up and run into the water as the guys arrive at the top of the hill and stop and look down as he jumps into this river. And they have some dogs with them, like big pit bulls, like the one that was shot earlier, and they let him loose. So these dogs come running down, or at least one dog, and chases him and into the river. So Llewellyn, who's been shot in his shoulder or whatever, is now gotten into the current, which is pretty fast, and he's cruising down the river, and there's a dog, like a big pit bull, in the water, like 20 meters or 30, 40 feet behind him, trying to keep up with him and trying to get him. And he probably goes for a couple hundred yards down the river and gets out on the opposite bank and staggers out, and he has a gun in the back, like a silver handgun, which I forgot to mention, that he'd taken from the dead guy with the money back by the tree earlier in the day. And it's like a big, 45 Magnum silver handgun. And he has it, again, in the back of his belt. So as he staggers out of the water, he pulls out that handgun and pops out the cartridge. And, I don't know much about guns, but I guess, if they're wet, they can still shoot, but it's good to get the water out of them, I guess. So he literally blows the water out of the tube in the gun, or the nozzle of the gun rather, and pops the cartridge back in just as this dog, this ferocious animal, charges out of the water and jumps up towards him. And just as he jumps up towards him, literally, he's able to raise the gun and blow the thing away. So it literally falls on top of him, dead. So then we cut to Anton Chigurh again in this white 1977 Ford that he had taken from this poor old guy that he killed with a stun gun on the highway. That's why he pulled him over in the squad car that he'd taken from the cop that he'd already killed back in the station, just to trade cars, clearly. And now it's nighttime, and he's arriving at the same scene where all these guys were killed in pickup trucks and the drugs were and such. And he meets these other guys in a kind of a fancy SUV, and clearly they're probably the drug cartel leaders or something, the ones whose money was at stake here. And they've been down there and not found the money. They're missing, $2 million in a briefcase. And he's like, so this is the guy's pickup truck that you found? He's pointing to, again, Llewellyn's pickup truck, which was left there, of course, when Llewellyn went in the river. And they're like, yep. And so he pops off the metal identification plate for the inside the car door, which identifies the vehicle, right? The vehicle identification plate, I think it's called. And then he just turns to those guys and shoots them. He's completely, there are no qualms with killing people for this gentleman. So he kills both of them, and we literally cut to the next day. Then we go back and see Llewellyn coming back to his trailer park and being with his girlfriend and deciding it's probably a good time to get out of Dodge. That's followed by this wonderful, iconic sequence, which really is, for me, the greatest part of the film. And again, it's early in the film, so it's not a spoiler alert, but it's where the visual is you see it's a remote Texaco petrol or gas station, in the middle of nowhere. And there's one of these little tiny square houses next to the pumps. And I think on the name of the station, so it says Art's Auto Supply. So there's a guy named Art who owns this little auto supply shop in the middle of the Texan desert and a one pump Texaco gas station. And again, this 1977 Ford pulls in there, and Anton goes inside and grabs some cashews and actually opens them and starts to eat them as he walks over to the register where there's this old elderly guy, probably in his 70s, behind the register. And he goes, "How much for the cashews?" And the guy's like, 69 cents. And he goes, "And for the gas?" And the guy makes almost the biggest mistake of his life. Instead of saying, $5 for the gas, whatever, he says, "So, is it raining up in Dallas?" I think that's what he says. Anton looks at him all of a sudden, again, his wonderful John Lennon Beatles mop head haircut, and says, "What's it to you? What do you care what the weather's like where I'm from? And, why do you care about me, basically?" And the guy looks at him kind of startled, saying, "Well, it's just making some small talk," or something like that. So Anton pops another cashew in his mouth and just keeps staring at him. The guy's really uncomfortable. He's like, "Well, I'm about to close now." He goes, "Really? What time do you close?" And pops another cashew in his mouth. He goes, "Oh, I don't know, when it gets dark." "No, what time do you close?" And the guy's like, "Well, again, when it gets dark." He goes, "Well, what time do you go to bed?" And the guy's just looking at him like, "What?" And it's just a 2-minute or 3-minute dialogue of death, basically. It's so clear that this guy's just toying with him once he has identified him. So this guy made this huge mistake of, looking out at the car and somehow realizing it's from Dallas and just saying, "Hey, is it raining up in Dallas?" And that's going to be the end of his life if he's not careful. So Anton, again, pops another cashew in his mouth and says, "What's the most you've ever lost on a coin toss?" And the guy looks at him, he's like, "What?" And he goes, "What's the most you've ever lost in a coin toss?" He's like, "Well, I don't know." And Anton pulls a quarter out of his pocket and flips it and then puts it on the counter and covers it with his hand. And he says, "Call it." And he goes, "Well, why do I want to call it?" Now, Anton's still holding his hand over this quarter, and he says, "What year is this coin from?" And the guy's like, "I don't know." And he's like, 1958. This quarter has been traveling around for 22 years until it got here. So Anton pops another cashew in his mouth and still has his hand on the quarter on the counter and says, "Go ahead, call it, heads or tails." And the guy's like, "Well, I don't know what's at stake. I don't know what I'm calling it for." He goes, "Oh no, you've known that forever. You've just never known it." And the guy's like, totally bewildered at everything this guy says, because he's, has this wonderfully deep voice, by the way. He's like, it's like croaky. It's hard to explain. It's haunting and very deep voice, almost like it's kind of underwater. And the way he talks, but it's creepy and haunting. And this guy's definitely unnerved, and he doesn't understand. We certainly are getting to understand, or we certainly do understand because we've seen what he's done before, that this is a dangerous game that he's playing, heads or tails. And the guy better answer correctly. But he's squirmy. He's like, I don't know what's at stake. And he goes, what do I have to win? And Anton says, everything. And he goes, but I don't understand. Everything? He goes, everything. And the guy just kind of goes, okay, well then, heads, nervously, And Anton takes his hand off the quarter, and sure enough, it's heads. He goes, "Oh, well done." It's a wonderful line. Well done, Whew. Basically his ticket to life, everything, right? So the guy had a 50-50 chance of departing or surviving, and he survives. And so the guy kind of, again, is totally bewildered, and I don't even know if he knew how much or how close he came to being erased from the planet. And he starts to take the quarter, like I guess to put it into his pocket or into the cash register. And Anton stops him and looks at him with this kind of smirk and says, "Hey, don't put that in your pocket." And the guy's like, what? And he goes, "That's not just another coin. If you put it in your pocket, it'll get mixed with the other coins and become just a coin." The guy's like, "Okay." He goes, and then easily the greatest look in the entire film happens, where Anton looks at this Texaco elderly proprietor, gas station proprietor, and he raises an eyebrow almost sarcastically. It's a hilarious look, because he's looking at the quarter and saying, "It's a special quarter. Basically, that quarter saved your life, pal. Save it." And he raises his eyebrow and kind of smiles. Almost, he doesn't wink, but he almost should have winked. I'm glad he didn't wink, but it's like he winks. It's an amazing expression. Again, this movie's full of like little nuances like that, but I love the expression he has. It's kind of like this kind of like, again, sardonic, sarcastic rather, one eyebrow raising look, which would be hilarious, but it's unnerving because we know this character and what he's capable of and what he's done. So it's makes it all the more exasperating and unnerving. And again, this poor chap has no idea how close he was to death. But it's a wonderful end to that sequence, this arched eyebrow look that Anton Chigurh gives this almost deceased Texaco gas station proprietor in the middle of the Texan desert. So I think I'll just stop it right there, because that's the end of, arguably one of the greatest little sequences in a film I've seen in a long time. I had forgotten how, again, well done and unnerving that Texaco gas station sequence is. And if anything, I'd recommend watching that. It's like a short film within a film, because you wouldn't have to even know what the movie's about. You know that this old man was in trouble from this unusual character, and he's such a great, again, unique character, and he certainly deserved the Oscar for winning what was it, best supporting role for No Country for Old Men. But again, effective, wonderful storytelling, and really gets us emotionally involved, which is what storytelling is all about. So if you guys agree, disagree, definitely put comments in the comments. And I'm always up for suggestions. So if you have an introduction of a film that you particularly like, put it in the comments and I'll take a look at it for sure. And hopefully we'll discuss it right here in the near future. So have a great day, you guys.